There's something I like about sharp practice in that you can recreate history at the same time you're telling stories. And some of the best stories are true. For example, if you heard a story about, someone wrote a story about an English baronet whose father was the governor of Hong Kong, and he was sort of disgraced his family after inheriting the title, so he went to Australia and became a police officer and hunted down bushrangers, but he wasn't very successful, but he managed to actually get a few of them. He kept his identity secret the whole time, and until a letter came and they accidentally revealed who he was, and then he got inspectorships and all this stuff. And if that was a book, that'd be a quite an imaginative book, but the fact that it's a real story, his name was Pottinger, the Baronet Pottinger, that makes it just more fun. And I think that that these sort of things, these stories are really good because they're very plausible. Like that Pottinger thing, that's all true. He's like his father was the first governor of Hong Kong. He's a freaking baronet. A baronet is not a noble rank, by the way. It's that is mountains and forest. A baronet is basically like a hereditary knighthood type thing. I'm not 100% sure, but a baronet is not a peerage. Anyone out there who's tremendously worried about British peerages, anyone out there who is a baronet watching this video and is wondering, am I actually a peer of the realm? No, you are not. You are merely just a knight. Anyway, yeah, Pottinger actually kept his identity secret. I believe it was at the request of his family. You can actually recreate something like that in sharp practice. You can have the gentleman ranker. A gentleman ranker was an officer who either, for some reason, couldn't become an officer. He was a gentleman who couldn't become an officer, whether because his family basically told him not to do it, as in he's basically been drinking his way around home, and his family sent him off to the army with a nice allowance, but obviously not as an officer, but still a gentleman. So he would be invited to the officers' mess. That's one of the reasons. He'd be treated better. He'd be invited to the officers' mess. He'd be treated as a gentleman. Another reason might be there were no vacancies in the particular regiment you wanted to join. Say if you were a Scotsman, you had your heart set on the 42nd Black Watch, there just wasn't an ensignship, or there was no way to get into the officers' ranks of the Black Watch. So you join as a gentleman ranker. They'd probably make you a corporal or something. And you would serve in the ranks until a place opened up, and then you would purchase a way into the Black Watch like that. Or any regiment, but that's just that one in particular. So there's plenty of reasons to be a gentleman ranker. That's actually one of the options for your officers. So you can tell that sort of story. I think Flashman comes in contact with the gentleman ranker a few times. It's a very interesting novel, wouldn't it? The gentleman ranker who never quite gets his officership. Maybe he's got a very lucky band of officers above him, and none of them ever die or retire. That'd be quite an interesting story. For this one here, that is a 7. That is sparsely cultivated land. So you can tell all these sort of stories in sharp practice, and even with there's random events which I'll get into in maybe another video, and just sort of how to take the random events and the way I do it, which is actually turn as many of them into little games as possible. So there was one which was you found a lady. There was basically a lady who was going to join the band, or the little group of soldiers, the company of soldiers. However, rather than simply just finding her, I busted out my copy of Legends of the Old West, gave everyone muskets and pointed it, made everyone up, and then put a bunch of deserters on the other side and had them rescue her from the camp, that sort of thing. And even if they lost, I would still have given them the lady, but it would have been a negative on the way she thought about the particular officer who rescued her. Whereas succeeding, it was a positive on the way she thought of the officer who rescued her. So I think she'll actually, she did actually roll well enough to be considered an ally. So she'll be popping up in this campaign as well. I'm not sure if she'll actually be on the tabletop though, or in the actual warband, or whether she's just at home. So the road is a 6, cultivated land. Okay, so for cultivated land, I simply go, bop, bop, dump the whole thing, and then grab a tiny hexagon. I'm glad that came up. Pop it down there, and then I hit it with wood fence. No, apparently that's too... Anyway. Apparently my scale's way off. Because, Anyway, so just put a little house on there, just to show that there's a farm here. So it looks like we're coming out of a sort of gap in a mountain range, and then a farm is opening up. So it's a largely central area here, and then a little bit of sparse stuff on the side. Again, I'm not rigging any of this. It's all just as the dice come up. Next to it is a 10, which is wooded mountains. Okay, grab some wooded mountains. Yeah, so it looks like we're in a little mountain range here. If I could get my act on and paint up these Portuguese, we could do up a Spanish type one, but I'll stick with North America for now. It's the one I've got the most terrain for as well. And I've got the miniatures painted, and that's the one the players want to do because they like their rifles, as most people do. Yes, it is very refreshing when you break out the mini ball rifles rather than having muskets, because you do just get so much more range. It's much more 8 for over here. That is hills. Getting that extra, for those who don't know, basically you just get you have the option to shoot at further distances essentially, and it's really cool because you don't really. The way we sort of use it is, well, the way it's sort of mostly used is not to kill the enemy at a longer range, but to sort of force the enemy to operate at reduced effect at sort of longer range, if that makes sense. So rather than being shot at when you get within 24, you're being shot at when you're at 48 away. And it's pot shots at long range. They're probably not going to do a whole lot of damage, but that point of shock is still coming in every now and then, or maybe you might take a bit of damage. So it sort of changes the way you play the game, and that's something I really like about sharp practice, is that the different eras you play in, the different weaponry that's available to you, really changes your tactics. So if you're playing the Napoleonic period, you might only have 2 units with rifles, or a single unit with rifles, and they can focus on a single enemy unit. And so you can snipe at one unit with, from across the table. You can sort of snipe all game with one unit. The American Civil War, your basic guys have rifles, and they can just cascade fire on the enemy the whole time, but then you're both giving up your maneuverability to do that. Or one person can sit back and shoot while the other actually moves in and takes 3 rounds of firing, 3 rounds of rifle fire at them to get into that good position and deliver a really nice close range shot. It's you get way more tactical flexibility with the mini ball rifles. 4 for the thing here, woods. I really like the mini ball rifles. You also only have to use 1 reload token with them, compared to the ones in the Peninsular War or earlier on, the American Revolution, which are 2 reload marker rifles, because of course by this time, hence the mini ball. Have I got a mini ball here? I believe I do. Where's my mini ball? Where on earth is mine? Oh, there it is. For those who are wondering what a mini ball is, it's that. It's a reproduction one. A friend of mine bought me back this from America. I believe it was in Kentucky at the Lincoln Museum. And he bought me back this and an old copy of the. It looks old, an artificially aged reproduction of the Gettysburg Address. It's very nice of him. So that's a mini ball. You can see it's got a hollow base. The star is a maker's mark or something. It's not historical. So you can see, yeah, it's like a domed ball with ribbing, and the general idea was the gas pressure would force this sort of skirt here out. This bit here would grip the rifling of the barrel and spin the bullet. It's came up with by a Frenchman, as quite a lot of actually good weapons innovations of the 20th century were. The French were quite good at coming up with weapon ideas. They were just abysmal at putting them into practice. They came up with smokeless powder. They came up with the QF 96, the system of rapid firing artillery, the smokeless powder 8mm Lebel. They came up with the mini ball. The French were freaking powerhouses of military. The first people to use helmets in the First World War. They were really coming up with some cool stuff. They just failed abysmally at putting it into practice. 6. That is woods. Yeah, so the French were actually not bad at military innovation. They just had a lot of committees. The Lebel rifle sucks because basically they wanted to have the Lebel rifle out quickly. So they had to basically just... They had a really nice design worked up, or they were working their way towards a nice design. And the government basically had a committee, and the committee said, no, we're just going to rush this. And so it came out with a piece of junk. It is the Lebel 1886. Lebel was just one of the guys who was working on the project. It was actually almost called like 5 different things. So they settled on Lebel for, you know. The carbine version, the sort of later carbine they came out with the stripper clip, it's called the Berthier, and it's not named after him. It's named after a guy called Berthier, but there was actually a Napoleonic marshal or a Napoleonic general called Berthier. He shows up quite a bit towards the end of the Napoleonic Wars. I believe it's the end. So that's our sharp practice table or map, whatever you want to call it. So we can see what we've got here is a sort of a mountain range. I'm imagining the mountain sort of comes in this way here and comes out that way, and this is our sort of gap through. And maybe this might be an abandoned farm. Maybe the war's driven this occupant off, and we got a lone farmer who's basically a lone farmer. Here we got a lone farmer who's basically just tending his land, and maybe one of his fields has fallen into disrepair, and he's sort of inhabiting this little area in this mountain valley. This would be a good place to put an outpost, which we'll talk about later. There's a sort of swampy area here, but I think we can tell a good story, and we can have a good game with this. We got sort of forest, a lot of woods, because North America. This farm might become a point of interest, so perhaps the farmer is a Confederate supporter, perhaps he's a Union man, perhaps he's a neutral party, perhaps he's a German and he doesn't actually speak English. You never know what's going on here in the Civil War. Anything can happen. So that's the map. I'll bring the camera around and I'll start talking to you again. So there we are. There is our sharp practice thing, and I'll put it up here. This is what our players will be fighting over. Myself and someone else will be fighting over this area. So what are we doing here? Well, I'm going to be the active player. I'm going to play the Confederates. I'm going to be the active player, and let's roll. I've just got the thing up here beside me to find out what we're doing in this area. So I'm going to say this is... it's around the time of Antietam in Maryland somewhere. So let's... what are we doing? Is this pre-Antietam? Is this after Antietam? Although, as I'm the Confederate player, that'd be pre-Sharpsburg or after Sharpsburg. So I'll roll the first dice, which is a 6, and the second dice, which is a 2. A lady's escort. Okay, well that works perfectly because the Confederates actually do have a lady traveling with them. So now we find the lady's escort. There are 18 different scenarios you can play. You can of course pick one. Screen the army would be a good one. Break in the bridge. Maybe you're trying to secure this little bridge for your regiment to move over. Remember, this is a company-sized force, so yeah, it's normally the sort of light company, or for the American Civil War, you could just have any random company. In this case, it's Alabama. I can't remember the exact number of the regiment, but it's an Alabama regiment. And this captain has been sent out to escort a lady. Now, let me read the actual scenario, and we'll see if he's escorting her maybe to her home in Maryland. Maybe he's there to get her sister, who is still at her house, and she wants to get out before the fighting starts. Perhaps she just wants to I'm not sure. We'll read the scenario, and then we'll come up with a reason why they're escorting this lady through this war zone. Okay, so a lady's escort in the book looks like it's written for a Napoleonic scenario in mind, where the lady is trying to get to a convent, to pray at the convent, and then return. I'm going to mix it up, and let's say the farm that we have there actually belongs to the lady's sister, and perhaps her father as well. And say that the lady is trying to get to that farm and speak to the father and the sister, and try and convince them to leave with her, or to leave the area. To get out of this area before the army comes through, or at least a regiment comes through. Maybe the Alabama regiment's sort of been diverted through this little path just to make sure there's no enemy nearby. And the enemy has basically... the scenario says that the lady's supposed to be a noblewoman. In this case, she's not. She's just a lady. So we'll say that the enemy mistakenly thinks this is a noblewoman. The Union intelligence was abysmal. Union intelligence officers sucked. Especially earlier than this, they were worse. Pinkerton was actually the famous FBI, the guy who basically created the FBI, the Pinkerton Agency, which is a private organization. He was McClellan's, I believe it was McClellan's head of intelligence, and he was abysmal at his job. So yeah, it would not be surprising to think that this is some woman of some importance that the Union forces are trying to kidnap, or perhaps she's a spy and they're trying to arrest her. Maybe we'll come up with something to the Union player. Probably that she's a spy, that they believe she's a spy. So, victory conditions. The leading player, myself, must cross the map to the Abbey farmhouse, allowing the lady a full half day of prayer. A full half of a day of prayer. So each turn is a half day for those. So you can't just arrive there and then leave the next turn. You have to arrive, half day, then leave. So it'll be half day in the farmhouse, catching up with the family, trying to convince her to leave. We may roll a dice. We may... I'll get the unit player maybe to secretly roll up a profile for the father, because of course you can do that. Secretly roll up a little bit of a profile and see what kind of a man he is. Maybe I'm bringing them back with me. Maybe I'll leave them there. Yeah, how it goes. Both sides receive for equal size main force. The leading player begins the game in area 23 with a carriage for the lady. Oh, so I have a carriage. The second force player... Okay, so the second force is actually in area 7, 10, or 13, and you dice for which. So, basically, the enemy player is not actually moving on from the table edge. They're actually going to be starting in between myself and the objective, and I've got to get to that farmhouse. So this should be very interesting. Both starts with 14 sacks of supplies, and the population is considered friendly to the leading player. Okay, we're in Maryland, all right. So, the second player always holds the initiative unless it is seized temporarily by the leading player. Okay, that is cool. So that's what we're playing now. Let me just bring up the character sheets and we'll run down who's in my force. Okay, so let's take a look at who's leading my force for this Sharp Practice campaign. So we have Captain Jeremiah A.D. Bell. Captain Bell is a very wealthy southern man who made his fortune in the silver mines of California. He's out in California doing a bit of prospecting, early prospecting. Long before the big gold rush, he manages to stake out like a nice little silver mine for himself. Boatload of money on the quiet, and he was happily living out in San Diego, or sort of some Californian town somewhere. The Californian town, living it up while he's getting this gold mine money or silver mine money or whatever it is. And when Alabama secedes, he comes back home and joins the Confederate Army as a captain. So he manages to throw a bit of cash around. So he's got quite a bit of money for game purposes. He can happily hand out bribes. He can grease palms. He can bribe men. He can do everything he can do with money, essentially. So he's an aristocratic type gentleman, as much as you can be, the American Southern gentleman, with some cash floating around. So let's have a look at his lieutenants. So we have Lieutenant Schneider. Lieutenant Schneider has actually only been in America for the last 6 months. He came over from Prussia he's sort of 22, 23. He came over from Prussia and started up a little farm with a bit of money he had saved up. When the war broke out, he felt it was his job to, it's his new country, he should fight for it, the Confederacy, of course. And he sort of lied about being a Prussian officer, or at least a Prussian NCO. He insinuated that he'd been in the Prussian military. And they went, oh, Prussian, okay. And they gave him a commission. He has no wife, no kids, no family, no relations of any kind in North America. So he's all on his own. And he leads my militia. Schneider leads the militia, which is mostly comprised of German-speaking people, or people descended from Germans, for the Alabama militia, which is fitting for somebody like Schneider to command. So Lieutenant Milton H. Falworth. Falworth is not a nice man. He was a plantation overseer, so he was basically a slave driver up until he lost his job for drunkenness, and he's still a raging alcoholic. To this day, he's got no wife or kids. Well, he has a wife and kids. He just has no idea where they are because they ran away from him because he's drunk. And Falworth is basically a jerk. The men aren't particularly fond of him. He's not especially brave. He's not especially courageous. He's pretty much a coward. Well, not a coward, but he's not one to stick his neck out for others. And he is an alcoholic, which is we've got some house rules for his alcoholism. So That's 3. Let's take a look at the leader of the skirmishers for this force. So we have Lieutenant Howard C. Miller. They'd probably be Lieutenant, but I keep saying Lieutenant because I'm Australian and we say Lieutenant. Lieutenant Miller. Miller was a U.S. Army sergeant. He has been in the Army his entire life. He was a bugler when he was young. So he actually went to the Army in Mexico as a bugler. Rose his way up through the ranks to be a sergeant. And then when the war kicked off, he's a son of Alabama, so he went back home. They saw that he was a sergeant, made him a lieutenant. So now he's with Captain Bell, and he's running around with him, commanding his skirmishers. And that pretty much clears us out for the officers. 3 lieutenants is probably more than you would have, but this is the American Civil War. There are no rules. There are no rules about company sizes, or what weapons people are armed with, or how many officers you have in a unit, or what even officer leads the unit. The American Civil War got hectic as all hell. Crazy. It's great for telling stories in. You do have to fit some rules. For example, 3 lieutenants is the maximum I would ever go. I'll not put another captain in there. But 3 lieutenant characters, that gives us one to command the militia, because I have a militia contingent, which is sort of the new guys, for a better term, the new guys. One to command, and then the captain can command half the regulars, the other lieutenant can command the other half. And then we have the sergeant. We have Sergeant Hillsborough. Hillsborough is actually a Navy man. He part of the Navy. He was actually in Mobile, Alabama. He's actually from Kentucky originally, but he was in Mobile when the blockade started. And since he saw no future in the Confederate Navy, he decided to join the Army. And they basically said, well, you were a non-commissioned officer in the Navy, we'll just make you a non-commissioned officer in the Army. And so he's adjusting to Army life. A little bit odd, a little bit of a weird guy. But he's a good enough sergeant, or he's a good enough NCO. So he's going to be the one who's going to be cracking some heads and driving our men onwards. So that's the officers and the sergeants. Let's take a look at the 2 big important characters we have with us. Of course, the lady and a gentleman they picked up in Virginia who seems to know his way around the backwoods. So we have Elizabeth Waltz is her name. She's a lady we'll be escorting. She was actually rescued by Snyder. She was taken captive just after the Battle of Bull Run when the Union Army was in full panic. Some Union deserters basically took her captive, and Schneider led a party of men which rescued her. He was actually wounded in the attempt. Schneider is the only one who has a wound. He's not bad. It's not a bad wound, but basically Schneider has a negative penalty on any axe that requires strength. Schneider also can't add his dice to melee combat because he's got a debilitating arm wound. That's not something in sharp practice. That's just something we added in for dramatic effect since he was shot. And then we used the Legends of the Old West rules to sort of do that game. And we rolled on the Legends of the Old West damage chart. And it turns out he's got an arm injury. So he's not a great... he's not the man you want to have in combat. But since he's leading the militia, that shouldn't come up anyway. The next is an Englishman who... he's the son of an Englishman. He's the son of an Englishman. Who basically just fought the revolution and then stuck around. His name is A.D. Wentworth III. He is actually a quite upper-class gentleman, but he's really a bushman at heart, a frontiersman. He is very at home in the frontier. He acts as an exploring officer for the company. He is someone they picked up in another scenario. There was a cabin, and both players... It was quite a fun scenario, actually. I think I've got to write up of it somewhere. But essentially there was a cabin, and both players were sort of... The first person who went near the cabin was going to be an enemy to this guy. I think it was the way the scenario worked out, and that was the way I was GMing it. Was that whoever first got to the cabin, he was going to be on the opponent's side. And the Union rushed their skirmishers into it to try and get some cover. So he's a Confederate sympathizer now, because the Union ransacked his house. So that's him. He's an exploring officer. He's actually represented by an Old West miniature with a shotgun. I won't put it up there, but you'll see it. I'll put some photos up in later videos. So he runs around with a double-barrel shotgun. Yeah, if he's on the table at all, most exploring officers aren't on the table. So that's the campaign as it stands. Elizabeth is trying to get back to her family. She's trying to meet with her father and sister to either convince them to leave the area until it's safe, or just generally check up on them, make sure they're okay. If they are going to stay behind, make sure that they should have enough food. Just, that sort of basic stuff. So it should be quite an interesting campaign. Thanks for putting up with the video. Maybe it was 2 videos. I hope that's given you a little bit of insight on how Sharp Practice campaign is at least set up. So I've taken you... That's as much work as it takes to set up a Sharp Practice campaign. It's like 5 dice rolls. Or it's like 2 dice rolls to actually find out the type of game we're playing. You can generate a map without rolling each square. I did that for fun, but you don't have to. We just got very lucky in that there's a town... there was a farmhouse like smack bang at the end of the thing. It just worked out perfectly. And then that's what I love about Sharp Practice is it leaves things open-ended enough that you can manipulate them to your own end. For instance, that escorting a lady to an abbey, very easy to change that into meeting her family, or you could even make it not a lady. You could have that be a gentleman. You're escorting some gentleman to a rendezvous with maybe a contact, or maybe the gentleman wants to go to the abbey and pray. Maybe the gentleman wants to go and see someone in the town, just a friend of his. It doesn't have to be a lady. It just so happened that this force had a lady with them. So that's enough rambling from me. I'll see you in the next one, and make sure you check out TooFatLardies.com. They've actually got a YouTube channel as well, TooFatLardies. They do really cool playthroughs. So if you want to see how Sharp Practice is actually played, I would definitely recommend going over to TooFatLardies. I'm not going to do any actual footage of the game itself, because 1, it jars the game to have to film stuff. 2, I have no setup to film a game, and 3, I don't really. This is sort of a. The game was not set up for the channel. I'm just saying that, well, if I'm doing the game, I might as well put some stuff up on the channel. So try and keep you informed of each battle as it gets fought. I'll show off some miniatures. I might actually show off the miniatures in a video straight after this. But yeah, have fun gaming, and definitely check out Sharp Practice. I have a review. I'll leave it in the comments below. If you'd like more videos on how to use SketchUp, or a video on how to use SketchUp, more videos on what you can do with SketchUp, let me know. And yeah, if you've ever thought about doing a Sharp Practice campaign, or you'd like to know how maybe it would adapt to your particular game system, because I think this could be used for far more than just Sharp Practice, put it in the comments below and let me know. Thank you very much for watching. Have a wonderful day.